great to see you all here. I just want to tell you something that happened to me when I was giving a training not too long ago. I was in a hotel in London and I had to go to the loo. So apologies right now for the context of this story. It happens in the men's toilet. And I went into one of those little cubicles, as one does, and a really strange thing happened. The guy in the cubicle next to me started talking to me. He had a bit of an Australian accent, but I thought, maybe this is what they do in Australia. He said, hi mate, he says, how are you going? And I said, I thought, I was a bit surprised, you know, but I thought I'd go along with it. I'm an easygoing sort of a guy. So I said, I said, hi. I said, thanks for asking, I'm going fine. Thanks very much indeed for asking. And then he said, tell me, he said, how's life treating you? And I thought, well, this is getting a little bit deep and we're getting into a conversation, but I thought I'll go along with this. So I said, to tell you the truth, well, actually, I thought I'd already answered the question, but never mind. I said, life's treating me very well. Thank you very much for asking. It's really, actually, it's treating me really well at the moment. And then he said something rather strange. He said, tell me, he said, what are you doing right now? And I thought, well, I thought maybe he was talking about my life, you know, but I thought I'd take him a little more literally, and so I said, to tell you the truth, I think I'm doing exactly the same as you are. The next thing I heard him say was, hang on mate, I'll have to call you back. Some idiot in the next cubicle keeps answering all my questions. At that point I felt a little bit, yeah. In fact, to tell you the truth, at that point I was using something that I'm going to tell you about right now. In fact, I tell you what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk to you about sort of tools that I use in relationships coaching and counseling and so on. But Des has been talking about this course that I run and you know, saying how wonderful it was, how it changed my life. So I thought I'd switch and tell you something out of that training that I do that's very life-changing. And indeed, as you could tell from what Des said, it and other things that I include in the training are pretty life-changing. So would you like to hear about something really life-changing right now? Yeah, okay. So I learned this when I was about 30. It was quite a while ago now, over 25 years ago now. And it did change my life. And I've used it every day since then, for over 25 years. So I'm about to tell you something that I hope you will use every single day for the rest of your life. What happened to me was that I read an article in a magazine that revealed something about Jack Nicklaus. And I found out since that Jack Nicklaus, by the way, was a world golf champion way back in the 1980s, I think. American guy, world golf champion. And this article was about him. And it revealed something about him which apparently he doesn't generally tell people about. So somebody obviously found out about it and somehow got into an article. In fact, the journalist who was writing about it clearly didn't understand really what it was about. But this is what the article said about Jack Nicklaus. In fact, it was a little story. He was playing golf one day with another professional. And that other professional, who's, by the way, whose name was also Jack Newton, mishit an easy shot. You know, so this happens in golf, but professionals, it's not supposed to happen to professionals. Every shot, as you probably know, is pretty vital when it, you know, comes up to the final score. He mishit an easy shot, and he was irritated and annoyed. And apparently, Jack Nicklaus said to him, "Jack, you seem to be irritated." And Jack Newton said, "Well, of course I am. I just mishit that easy shot." And Jack Nicklaus said something to him rather amazing. He said, "But Jack, that was the best shot you could have played." Just think in your minds, what on earth did he mean? I looked at it and I thought, what the hell is he talking about? Maybe what he means is something like, look, Jack, you played the shot, there's no point in being disappointed now, it's too late, so you might as well accept it. But that's not what he meant. That's not what he meant at all. He meant literally that that was the best shot that Jack Newton could have played. Why on earth would he say that? Think about it. I kind of figured, I'd spent a long time thinking about it because I was already interested in mind-changing stuff, and I thought, this is a pretty amazing thing for Nicklaus to have said. And then I worked out why I thought he said it. It took me quite a while. I thought, well, probably why he said that was because when Newton played that shot, there had to be a reason that he mishit it, didn't there? There had to be some reason. Something must have caused him to mishit the shot. And whatever that reason was, that reason existed at the time he swung the club, didn't it? And so that's why the shot he hit was mishit, because the reason was there. And I thought, well, that's a pretty intriguing idea, if that's really what Nicklaus was talking about. It could have been anything, couldn't it? Could have been the sun was in his eyes, that's why he missed the shot. Could have been a fly landed on his nose at an awkward moment. He was distracted. Maybe he got out of bed the wrong side that morning. Maybe he was in a bad mood. Maybe he wasn't focused. But whatever the reason was there, and that's why he mishit the shot. And what would you think about that if you managed to figure out what I just said? What, even if you're not a golfer, what would it imply to you? What might you conclude from what Nicklaus said?
That's where you were at the time in your mind.
Yes.
Whatever was happening.
That's right.
That's where you were at.
That's right. So what I thought was, my goodness. By the way, I later found out that Nicklaus, because I got close to him later on, I found out that he believed that knowledge, that awareness was the reason he became world golf champion. But at the time, all I realized was that if that's true of golf, then it must be true of everything. In other words, I thought, my goodness, if the way Newton swung that club was the only thing he could have done, then wouldn't that be true of everything? Maybe everything we've ever done in our lives is the only thing we could have done for exactly the reason that you just said. Because that's what was in our mind at the time. Because that's the way we were thinking at the time. Because whatever caused us to do the thing we'd done, whatever that might have been, existed at the time we did what we did. And so my conclusion to that was, my gosh, if that's true, if everything we've ever done is the only thing we could have done, wouldn't that be kind of have a big implication in life? But I thought, hang on, that can't be true, can it? It can't be true because we have choice, don't we? And I thought, how could everything I've ever done be the only thing I could have done when we have choice? I could have chosen to do A or B, and I did A, so was that the only thing I could have done? My mind was in a bit of a whirl about this, so what did I do? I took myself off down to the local university. I was in Australia at the time. The university was University of New South Wales. I walked in, asked to see a professor of philosophy and a professor of psychology. They were perfectly delighted to see me. Nobody ever walks in off the street asking for their wisdom, so they were fine about that. I walked into the philosopher's study. I remember it now, and I told him a little story about Nicklaus. I told him what I was concluding, and I asked him, "Is that true?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Absolutely. It's totally true." He said, "We've known this for a long time." He says, "Everything you've ever done is the only thing you could have done, and that applies to everyone else as well." Because of the way you were thinking at the time, because of what was causing you to think the way you were thinking, because of everything about you, every attribute you had, your knowledge, your abilities, your ways of thinking, your attitudes, beliefs, values, morals, everything caused you to think what you thought at every moment. And because of that, because of the way you thought, you did what you did. He said, "There's nothing new in that." I said, "Oh my goodness," he said, "this seems to be kind of extraordinary. Because surely there is some implication to this. If it's true that everything I've ever done is the only thing I could have done, then how does regret fit in to your thinking? Would you have any regrets if you knew that everything you'd ever done was the only thing you could have done? Would you ever blame yourself for anything if you knew that everything you'd done was the only thing you could have done? Let me explain it a little bit further. Everything we do is caused by the way we think. The way we think is caused by who we are at that moment. Everything that makes us who we are at that moment causes us to think the way we think, and that causes us to act the way we act. Now, what about this thing about choice? I asked the philosopher. I said, well, surely I had choice, didn't I? Yesterday, 12 o'clock, I did what I did. I could have done something else. I got on a bus, I could have chosen not to get on the bus. I could have chosen to do anything I wanted. He said, no. He said, that's a myth. He said, the reason, yes, you did choose. Of course you chose. We make hundreds of choices all the time. He said, you make probably 200 or 300 choices a day. He said, it's not the question. The question isn't whether we have choice. He said, the question is, why did we make the choice we made? Why did we choose to do A and not B? Very simple. Because of the way we were thinking at that moment. Why were we thinking the way we were thinking at that moment? Because of who we were at that moment. Because of everything that made us who we were. Our knowledge, our abilities, our attitudes, our ways of thinking that we've learned, our unconscious programming, which drives various things like feelings and so on. What else could you add? Values, morals, all those things. can influence the way we think. And of course that's circumstances, okay? That's certainly true. The circumstances we're in, the situation we're in will affect how we think. But given the situation we're in, the way we think is the only way we could think at that moment, given who we are. And what determines who we are, by the way, the word determines come in here. Some of you may know that in the world of philosophy, determinism is a huge, huge thing that philosophers talk about. This guy told me that what he was telling me, or what I'd figured out from what Jack Nicklaus said, philosophers used to argue about, they used to have debates about it. The debate was always, is life totally determined? Do we live in a totally determined world? The debates that the philosophers used to have ended sometime in the 1950s and 1960s, because by that time there wasn't a philosopher left who could put together an argument that this wasn't true. Every philosopher knows that this is true. The next thing I said to him was, well, hang on, if everything you ever done is the only thing you could have done and the same applies to me, I said, this seems pretty amazing. Gets rid of regret, gets rid of self-blame. By the way, if it's true of us, then it's true of everyone else as well, isn't it? And if it's true of everyone else, if everything they've ever done is the only thing they could have done at each moment, given who they were at that moment, given their ways of thinking, given their attitudes, given their ways of making choices and decisions, if everything they've done is the only thing they could have done, then we'd have to stop blaming them too, wouldn't we? So I asked the philosopher, I said, this seems to be huge, it seems to be highly significant. So why, I'm 30 years old, why is this the first time I've come across this? Why don't you guys teach people this stuff? He says, oh, I can tell you that. He said, first of all, if we did, he said, people would think we were crazy. Because it seems such a, it seems such a way out sort of idea, doesn't it? That everything everyone's ever done is the only thing that they could have done seems crazy. So everyone would think we were crazy, so that's one reason. Secondly, he said, people would misuse it and abuse it. Why do you think he said that? He said if everyone knew that everything they'd done was the only thing they could have done, he said they'd be letting themselves off for all the bad things they've done, wouldn't they? They'd say, oh, I might have, done this, done that. I ought to feel guilty about it, but hell, now this philosopher's telling me it's the only thing I could have done, given who I was at the time, given the way I was thinking at the time. It's the only thing I could have done. So the philosopher said people would misuse it. And I went away and thought about that, and about a week later I went back and saw him. And I said, I've been thinking about what you said about people misusing it. One of the things he told me in that initial meeting, he said if we taught it to people, he said you'd have bank robbers walking into court with their philosopher on their arm, wouldn't you? And saying to the judge, listen to this guy, Your Honor, he'll tell me that robbing the bank was the only thing I could have done. Having heard what I've said so far, do you think that would be true? Do you think that robbing the bank would have been the only thing the bank robber could have done? What do you think?
It still depends on where the person was at, really, because
it depends where he was at.
It's still driven by thoughts, isn't it? It's still driven by his thought.
Yes, he is. But what the philosopher would say, that the way he was thinking this was the only way he could have been thinking, given who he was at the time. By the way, why do you think we are who we are? Why aren't we all identical? Why do you guys think the way you think? Why do I think the way I think? I've got some ideas that I'm sharing with you now. So obviously we think differently up till now. What makes us who we are?
Okay.
Absolutely. Our life history. We're all nothing more or less than a product of our life history. Every single thing that's ever happened in our lives has made us who we are today.
Our voids made us who we are.
Sorry, made us?
Our voids made the values, and then the values.
Yeah, everything, values.
Yeah.
But Elliot was talking about values earlier, wasn't he? The values you have are the only values you could have given your history. They've been totally determined by your history. That every way you think is the only way you could think given your history. You are who you are because of your history. So anyway, this point that the philosopher made about, the answer to the bank robber thing, by the way, absolutely. When he robbed the bank, it's the only thing he could have done, given who he was, given his bank robber way of thinking, given all his history that led him up to that, absolutely. So he said you'd have bank robbers walking to court saying to the judge, it's the only thing I could have done. What do you think the judge would say, even if he knew that it was the only thing he could have done? He would say, I know it's the only thing you could have done, because you were a bank robber, that's why you robbed the bank. But sorry, there are consequences. You're still responsible for robbing the bank. Does that make sense? And there are consequences, and the consequences you're going to prison for 10 years. And that'll give you plenty of time to think about whether you're going to keep robbing banks when you come out. So yeah, that's right. So I went back to this philosopher and opened up that subject with him about a week later, and I said, look, it just seems to me, I've kind of already answered the question I'm about to ask, but I said it seems to me that even if we've done the only thing we could have done, we're still responsible. We're still responsible for everything we've done. Nobody else can take that responsibility. And then he said, okay, I buy that, so what's the difference between that and blame? Since we've said that there's no sense in blaming people if they've done the only thing they could have done, so what does it mean to make them responsible? And I said, well, it seems to me that in a determined world, which you say we live in, responsibility is only about the future. Because after all, we've done what we've done. It may have been the only thing we could have done, but we are now in a position to think about what we're going to do tomorrow. And taking responsibility for the things we've done is only about, in a determined world, is only about what we're going to do now forward. And after all, everything we've done is done. Everything everyone else has done is done. So what's the point of I'm thinking about what's done? The only thing that's really worth thinking about is what am I going to do now forward? And so in a determined world, which I'm telling you right now we live in, the only thing that we need to think about is what are we going to do now forward. And if we've done bad things in the past, yes, it was the only thing we could have done. If everyone else has done bad things in the past, that's the same, only thing they could have done. But one, we need to think about what we're going to do now forward in relation to any stupid, bad, wicked, whatever things we've done in the past. And secondly, the bank robber, as we already said, is still responsible for what he's done. So he needs to go to prison. There are still consequences. So understanding we live in a determined world is kind of amazing. It's an amazing way to live. Why? Because regrets disappear straight away. It's seriously true that nothing you've ever done could have been different. How could it have been different? You would need to have been a different person at that moment. You would need to have had different values, different beliefs, different ways of thinking, different attitudes, different morals, values, whatever. The only way you could ever have done anything different at any moment is if you've been thinking differently, and the only way you could have thought differently is if you've been a slightly different person. Do you think it's ever possible that you could have been a slightly different person at any moment in your life? No. Because the only way you could have been a different person and therefore done something else is if you'd had a different history. Is it ever possible for your history at any moment to have been different? No. Absolutely impossible. And furthermore, do you think your history could have been different? Do you think any part of your history right now could have been different? Absolutely not. The only way your history could have been different is if somebody, somewhere, that influenced your history had been a slightly different person at a moment when they did what they did.
But two people can have the same history and react differently.
Not if their history is absolutely identical. There has to be a reason why two people react differently. The only possible reason for two people reacting differently is if something about their way of thinking or their way of reacting or their way of responding was different. The only way that could happen is if something up here in those two people had been different.
Yeah.
And the only way that's possible is something minute in their history was different. So when we say two people could have the same history, yeah, broadly speaking, they could have the same history, but there has to be a reason why they think differently. You cannot escape that. Now, what I'm saying to you is you can let go of all regret. You can let go of all self-blame. You can stop thinking that you could have ever done anything different because you couldn't. By the way, none of this says anything about the future, does it? We're only talking here about the past. And since the present is simply a consequence of the past up to this moment, the present couldn't have been different either. The way you guys are thinking about what I'm saying right now, you may be thinking in different ways. You may be thinking this guy's a complete idiot. Or how could this be true, or whatever. Other people are sitting there thinking, yeah, this makes sense, I can understand this. So what you're doing right now is totally determined by who you are right now. Does that make sense? And who you are right now could not have been different.
I'm thinking about my sisters and myself.
Yes.
We're all different. We had the same parents, same
Yes.
parents.
Absolutely.
Yes, but the way I'm responding now, this is not how my other sisters
No,
would respond to
absolutely.
the same,
Absolutely.
what you're saying.
So there's something different about you and your sisters and the way you
Yeah.
think, absolutely right, and there has to be a cause for that. Things don't just happen at random. Okay, so something happened somewhere in your life that sent you off in a slightly different direction to your sisters. Yeah. So give up regret, give up blame, stop blaming other people. If your partner just told you you're a twat and you're thinking, he shouldn't have said that. But understand this, he could not have said anything different. The only way he could have said anything different is if he'd been thinking in a slightly different way when he said what he said. And is that possible? No, because he is who he is. And therefore he says things the way he thinks, and therefore he says what he says. We live in a totally determined world. If you're blaming your partner, your past partners who you're no longer with for anything, you're thinking in a totally invalid way, because we live in a determined world. Now all of that is kind of nice, because you can just let go of the past. And you can let go of the present as well. If you think you should be somebody different right now, that was never possible. Never possible. The person you are right now is the only person you could have been. But the future is wide open. The wonderful thing about what we call determinist thinking is that the future is wide open. You can make of it what you want. Yes, okay, you'll be influenced by who you are and by the way you think, but you're capable of changing. In fact, I would hope that all of you are a slightly different person now than you were 20 minutes ago. So you can change, you can read things, you can go on courses, you can go on trainings, you can develop yourself, you can become whoever you want to be. If you think you shouldn't be who you are, you're wrong.
So I just determine premeditated thought then.
I'm sorry?
Premeditated thought.
Premeditated thought.
As in, like, you had you gave
The
the
bank
example of
robber,
the bank robber,
premeditated.
right. So, and if, how can I say?
Was the bank robber premeditating his bank robbery? Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Could he have been thinking differently at any moment during that premeditation? No. He thought in the only way he could thought, given who he was, all the time. But the future is whatever you want to make it to be. So let go of all negative thoughts. Every negative thought, by the way, in a determined world is completely irrational. Every negative thought you ever have does not take account of the fact that we live in a determined world. If you think anyone should be different, you're wrong. They couldn't have been. If you think anyone should have done anything different, you're also wrong. They couldn't have done. But if you want anything to be different in the future, go ahead, make it happen. Future is whatever you want to make it to be. And I've been living that way for 25 years, and I can tell you, if you start to think in that way, and you think in that way all the time, life is amazing, absolutely extraordinary. So I hope you'll take it away and think about it. Do not let another day go past without realizing that everything you've ever done and everything everyone else has ever done is the only thing you and they could possibly have done, and then change it in the future. There you go.
Big round of applause for Graham, please. Right.